guys, Lemmy here. Welcome back to another art video. Today I am doing the cheap art supplies challenge, and this has been going around YouTube a lot lately, and because of all those videos I really feel inspired to work on this challenge. That and a lot of you guys have left comments asking me to do this specific challenge. So if there's something you probably don't know about me, is that I hate spending money on art supplies that I don't need, because I feel like I need so many things like Copic marker refills or palette refills like tubes of paint for my watercolors or something like that, or I could get refills for my liners, or there's just so many different things that I could be spending my money on that I actually need instead of buying cheap art supplies. And yes, they are cheap, but they do add up. So I really was thinking of just actually not doing this challenge, even though I really wanted to. And my friend Pencil Butter said that she wanted to do it as well, but she was thinking about getting one of those kits that kids get for like Christmas gifts or birthday gifts or holiday gifts, where it's a whole bunch of art supplies in one little kit. And that jogged my memory that my grandpa bought me one of those sets when I was younger. And also, I don't like buying supplies, but I also tend to hoard the supplies that I do have. So then I remembered that I do actually have one of those children's art kits, and I disassembled it a long time ago and I kind of condensed it so I could store it more easily. And I just decided, like, I'll just use that. Like, that will be my cheap art supply. I didn't spend any money on it, which I guess makes it more cheap now. But yeah, I tried looking up. Now, this is a really old set, so I tried looking it up now in today's time. And on the wrappers of the pastels, it says gallery, and there's a G on the paints. So I looked that up, and I don't see any gallery brand, but I saw something that looks exactly like what my art set looked like before I disassembled it a long time ago. So it seems that this set is now being sold by US Art Supply for $23. And I'm sure when my grandpa got me this a long time ago, it was much cheaper than that. It's an 82-piece color creativity art drawing set. That's how it's advertised as. Now, this set has watercolors, pastels, colored pencils, normal pencils, brushes, a kneaded eraser, and a pencil sharpener, and something like, I think, maybe sandpaper or something like that. And it comes in a wooden case. So for this picture, the only supplies I'm actually using from that kit are the watercolors and the colored pencils. I have my own kneaded eraser, but it's like the same thing that came in the kit, so I don't really feel like that's cheating. And other supplies that I used are watercolor paper, because I wanted to not use printer paper. If you consider how many pieces of watercolor paper come in a pad and then do the math, it's really not that expensive for one sheet of paper. So I just used watercolor paper because I knew that the pigment in the watercolor was not going to be very, well, I guess pigmented, and that it was going to be very faded looking, and that I would have to do a lot of washes. So I wanted a heavy-duty paper to kind of accommodate that. And because I did watercolor, I had to tape it down. I don't have any normal masking tape, so I used my painter's tape. So the blue painter's tape, as you can see here, I'm not sure if it's more expensive than masking tape, but it's just tape that has a weaker adhesive to it, so that when you remove it from your picture, there's less chance that you'll actually rip off the surface of your paper or rip the paper itself. And painter's tape is used for actually painting homes and getting nice clean lines with your moldings and all that when you paint your house. I'm like trying to English and it's not working, but yeah, so I use painter's tape, and I didn't really feel bad about using it because I took it off of another picture that I did recently. So it was like recycled painter's tape. So it wasn't like nice and crisp and new. It was kind of like barely sticking onto the paper. And as you can see, like the adhesive was barely sticking to the mat, so it kept popping up and wrinkling the picture, and it was like a pain in the butt. But yeah, so another supply that might not be considered cheap art supplies that I used is a Sakura jelly roll in white, just to add a little bit of shine to the eyes. And that is a cheap art supply because it's actually like $1 something for a pen, and I don't think that's expensive. So instead of buying a big jug of crummy white paint that I don't need, I was like, I'll just use my white jelly roll. And I also used a blue ballpoint pen just to add a little bit of detail in the eyes. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about the quality of the supplies that I used and the picture itself. So I wanted to go for a semi-realistic girl looking up, and I wanted like a shattered glass effect. I don't know why I wanted this, but I wanted to be like pale blue and stuff like that. And I felt like because the watercolors I knew were not going to be pigmented, I could get a lot of pale colors from the set, so I wouldn't be disappointed if it didn't look bright and pretty. I ended up sketching out the picture with I think it was a blue colored pencil from the set, so I didn't even use a normal pencil. And yeah, the paint was awful. And I say that because it was really chalky. It would dry really quickly, kind of like gouache would, but it didn't look like gouache. It was like in between watercolor and gouache, but it was just really crummy, like really terrible. And there was no way of making anything darker. Despite how thickly I mixed the paint in with the water, I just couldn't get it to be dark because I wanted her hair to actually be black. And, well, that kind of failed, but I mean, I tried. So the watercolors weren't the best. The colored pencils seemed fine, but I used them very sparingly because I liked kind of the gradient from the top to the bottom of the picture that I had, where it was more colorful up top and then it got lighter towards the bottom. So I didn't really want to add too much detail with the pencils. So, but they seemed alright in comparison to like something like Crayola, like I would say is around the same quality as that. But the watercolors, the watercolors. The watercolors. I had a lot of watercolor options, but they just didn't seem to want to be like a normal watercolor would. Like, it was different from Crayola too, so. And that's kind of what I based all my cheap art supplies on, is Crayola, because I grew up using Crayola products and I made a lot of pictures using Crayola products, so I feel like they're the standard for a good children's art supply. Now, there's something that I want to say, because I feel like every artist on YouTube has said this during this challenge, and that is that it doesn't matter if you have cheap art supplies or not. Now, I agree that a good artist can use cheap supplies to make a good picture. So the supplies doesn't make the artist. If you give an artist Copic markers, because I guess that's what everyone thinks is like super great, if you give an artist Copic markers and they're a novice, like they haven't really drawn anything, they're not going to make anything super amazing just because you gave them a good art supply. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to why good art supplies are important. Because I feel like no one has addressed this really, and that is when you use cheap art supplies and you make a picture, over time that picture is going to fade out and become very dull. And that is because these products are not light fast. So if you're going for an artist quality art supply, you are putting that money into that supply, not that it's going to really help you make the picture. It's going to make the picture that you have made last longer over time. So I want to kind of like clear that up, is that supplies don't make the artist. But if you want something to make something that's going to last, you really should invest in better supplies than children. I don't even count this as student grade. This is like children's supplies. So this stuff is not going to last over time. If I look at the pictures that I made using Crayola products, they are totally faded out and they look terrible. And compared to the day I actually made them, they just look like a shadow of the former picture. Now, I say that because I used a lot of Crayola crayons to make pictures, and after I'm done making the picture, it looks great. And then after I look at it like a year or two later, even if it's not in direct sunlight, because sunlight does fade out your picture, but even if I stored it properly and I look at it, it still looks terrible. So my advice is that if you do not have really good art supplies, but you do have a scanner, as soon as you're done with your artwork, scan it in and make sure that you do all the color corrections to tweak it to make it look as much like the original picture as possible, because over time that original is going to fade out and become dull. So if you really actually like the picture that you did create, you can print it out from a print shop or something, so you always have that picture that you made. Even if it's a print, at least you still have what it looked like instead of what it turned into. So that's why it's really important that you guys should think about, if you're serious about wanting to keep your pictures or sell them to other people and not feel like you kind of cheated them or something, you should get nicer supplies to make sure that the piece that you made for yourself or someone else will last a lifetime and that it can be enjoyed over the years. So with that being said, that's why I no longer offer Crayola crayon commissions, because when I realized that the pictures were starting to fade out and not look as nice, I didn't want to offer that to people, just because I just felt like it wasn't what people deserve. Like, if they're going to spend money for something, they should have something that will last them. So that's all I have to say for this challenge. I hope that you guys liked my picture or thought it was interesting, and I hope that maybe if you didn't know about some art supply information, that you kind of learned something from this, with the difference between cheap and more expensive art supplies. So with that being said, I'll see you guys next week for another speed paint, and yeah, take care, and I'll talk to you guys really soon. Bye!